the other, and has a great park leading up to it. So certain things are much easier to do, in a way, in a film than they are in a novel, in which you've got to write all this stuff down.
It's really something to fit between Pemberley, which is the top of the pile, and
Netherfield.
And Netherfield,
well,
yes.
I think this is, in so many ways, absolutely perfect. It is
in England in early 19th century, society was obviously rather rigidly layered, and people really knew their places in relation to everybody else. But this has got so many features. I mean, it's got that wonderful, slightly over-decorated quality that would suit Lady Catherine.
And not only that, it's a huge acreage, which all comes under the domain of Feltham House.
Yeah.
And you've got this escarpment we can see from
in a way, looking for locations so we can depict the differences between the various families and people that live in there was quite simple, because one starts quite small, starting perhaps Hunsford Parsonage, which belongs to Mr. Collins, and you work your way up to the Bennets, and from the Bennets to Netherfield, which is rented by the Bingleys. And from Netherfield you go to Rosings, which is owned by Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and biggest and best of all is Darcy's house, which is Pemberley. That must be the most magnificent.
The production designer, Jerry Scott, and the location manager, Sam Breckman, they have to work very, very closely together. They're going to give the whole look to the drama. In fact, we started looking at locations before we were officially in production for this. And then Jerry thought she remembered this village in Wiltshire, which in fact is Laycock, which might do for our Meryton. And we thought we should start with that, because it's very difficult to find a whole village that you can convert.
I'm just going to knock.
Left, left, right, left, 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 right, left, right.
Action! Detail, forward, mark.
Jane Austen is writing about a fairly contained world. We won't be really interested in Meryton in any other aspects other than dashing soldiers, hat shops. We see it really through the girls' eyes. We see it as a place where people meet, social gatherings, bit of shopping. It's a fun place. We're not going to be interested in beggars. We're not going to be interested in any poverty, because that's not what's required by the script. There's no point in throwing in images that are not relevant to the world that she's creating. And everything that everybody does should be contributing towards the nature of the piece.
And clear the door.
Step back up, yeah.
Step back. Cheers, thanks a lot. Get up.
Shall we be quite safe here, Mr. Darcy, do you think?
Damn silly way to spend an evening.
One thing that film can do very, very quickly is tell you a lot about the characters by what they're wearing and how they look. Pages of description in a novel can actually be done at first glance on film. So it's very apparent to us when we first see, for instance, the Netherfield party arrive at the Meryton Assembly Room, that these people have more money than the local society.
Mr. Bingley, allow me the pleasure of welcoming you to our little assembly here.
Sir William, I'm very glad to see you.
Miss Bingley is keen to display all her wealth and fashion aspirations. In fact, she wants to look like, you know, somebody out of Hello magazine or Gucci, straight off Bond Street. Whereas the Bennet girls would have been country girls who had handmade frocks made at home, maybe from hand-me-downs. And Miss Bingley would never have been seen in a print frock. She would have always worn silk or very, very fine muslin, embroidered muslins.
When I read the book, I note down any specifics relating to any character, any particular
nervous disposition, whatever it happens to be, wild, whatever. And then reading the script, the same thing. Any stage directions pertinent to that character. Gradually I'm building a picture. I make sure I then cross-refer with the director and costume, make sure we're all going in the same direction. Mrs. Bennet. It appears from the book and the script, is a very nervous character. Her nerves are always causing her problems. She's fairly hysterical. So I wanted a wig that emphasised that. And the style of the time had a lot of short hair around the face. So I left Alison's a little bit longer and didn't dress it with anything that made it stiff. So as she shook or shouted or spoke, so the curls actually exaggerated that. And I decided that would help with the characterisation, the nervous disposition of Alison.
Never mind, Sarah. You must come to Miss Bennet this moment. Come along, girl, and help her on with her gown. Never mind, Miss Dizzy's standing.
Mama, where is my new locket that Lydia brought me from London?
It's a truism to say casting is important. It's probably the most important thing or aspect of the whole production process. If Elizabeth Bennet comes on, or Mrs. Bennet or Mr. Bennet comes on, and they say, oh, it's not how I imagined Mr. Bennet, then you have to work very, very hard to get over that hurdle in order to get people back into the series. So it's doubly enhanced in a sense that you have to get people who are acceptable as these characters, especially, for instance, the Bennet family.
Confined and unvarying indeed it is not, sir. The country is a vast deal pleasanter than town, whatever you may say about it.
Mama, you must take Mr. Darcy's meaning.
Do I? Do I? He seems to think the country nothing at all.
I first of all read the book and then read the scripts. And of course, as soon as I read it, I could hear the voice of Mrs. Bennet. She just comes off the page. So beautifully written. The character is all there. It's all there. It's like a box of chocolates, you know, it's just ready to dive into. And I just couldn't resist.
Mr. Collins is such a sensible, respectable young man, and he's taken quite a fancy to Lizzie. And I don't think he could find a better wife. He favoured Jane at first, but Bingley was there before him. Now there will be a great marriage. And of course, that will throw the girls into the path of other rich men.
The character was easy, but the language is very difficult because, of course, we speak in a completely different way. And you keep wanting to put modern phrases in. And everyone who's been involved with the production, all the actors have said that they found the dialogue extremely difficult to learn. You think you know it, then when you come to run it, you find that continuity keeps coming up and saying, no, that's wrong, this is wrong, and ticking off all these words. And at first it was like a nightmare. I thought, I'll never get on top of this, I'll never get the hang of it. Thought I was the only one, but in fact everyone's had the same problem. But once you do get over that, once you get into the rhythm and the speech patterns that they used, then it all begins to make sense.
Jane Austen's dialogue is absolutely wonderful to work with because she does write very distinct speech patterns for all the characters. Darcy is very economical with his words and very, very powerful. He never wastes a word, and he speaks generally in short sentences. Elizabeth is very light and witty and quick off the mark and articulate. Mrs. Bennet says a great deal to not much purpose. Mr. Collins is a compendium of cliches. Mr. Bennet hardly ever speaks anything except when he's got his tongue in his cheek. Almost every remark is ironic. And so you've got lovely things to work with.
Jane Austen is preeminently a writer of gentle irony, and it's very difficult to know exactly what we mean by that. And irony is certainly very close to wit. Irony is nearly always clever. Irony can be taking pleasure in reducing someone else, to making someone else ridiculous, sharing this joke with a third party.
It is fortunate for you, Mr. Collins, that you possess such an extraordinary talent for flattering with delicacy. May I ask whether these pleasing attentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are they the result of previous study?
They arise chiefly from what is passing at the time, sir. I do sometimes amuse myself by writing down and arranging such little compliments as may be adapted to ordinary occasions. But I try to give them as unstudied an air as possible.
Excellent. Excellent.
Jane Austen, of course, wrote wonderful characters, and partly it's an absolute doddle. You just describe what they do in the book and write down what they say. With some of the characters, it's very much more interesting than that, because Darcy, for example, in the book, is somebody that we don't understand at all at the beginning of the book. He's described as a proud, disagreeable man, and that's virtually all you get. He's obviously very interested in Elizabeth because he talks mostly to her. But then by the end of the book, we realise a lot of things about him. And the actor has somehow got to give a sort of inkling. He's got to understand all this, or he can't play the part. He mustn't give away too much of how Darcy's going to be a sympathetic character at the beginning. But he's got to play him in such a way so that he's not just a really nasty person who turns into a really nice person. Okay. He's somebody who's capable of being really nice all along, but various circumstances in his life have turned him into a rather withdrawn and haughty person.
Yeah, I think that there is a problem with his attractiveness. I think that there's very little about him which is appealing. He's utterly and unreasonably dismissive of almost everybody he meets. You know, it's up to other people whether they find that fascinating about him or not. I think if one were to meet Darcy in real life, I think you'd take against him pretty quickly.
Come, Darcy. I must have you dance. I must. Hates you standing about in this stupid manner. Come, you'd much better dance.
I certainly shall not. An assembly such as this, it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged at present. You know perfectly well it would be a punishment to me to stand up with any other woman in the room.
Good God, Darcy, I wouldn't be as fastidious as you are for a kingdom. On my honour.
I see Elizabeth as independent, witty. She's got a wonderful sense of humour, great intelligence, and she thinks her integrity is perfect. She does have integrity. She's just a bit misguided on the prejudice bit.
I don't think she would have developed the prejudice against him quite as violently had not her pride been hurt. In fact, Jennifer, who plays Elizabeth, found this in the playing of it, that she's quite prepared to be amused by Darcy's arrogance, even when her mother's slighted. But when she herself gets slighted, it becomes a sort of obsession, I think.
She is tolerable, I suppose. But she's not handsome enough to tempt me. Bingley, I'm in no humour to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. Go back to your partner, enjoy her smiles. You're wasting your time with me.
I think Darcy is arguably the most complicated character. He's terribly unpredictable and manifests himself very differently all the time. He can be extremely gracious one minute and then literally on a sixpence he'll suddenly shut down again. And he can be utterly baffling. And I think he probably makes the biggest journey of any of the characters in terms of change.